Emily Ward stepped through the heavy iron gates of Storm Ridge Air Base at 5 a.m., the desert chill creeping into the collar of her worn flight jacket. In her pocket, her hand clutched a cold piece of metal, making sure it was still there, even when the entire world around her tried to ignore her existence. Whispers started as she crossed the training yard, where the floodlights cast sharp angles on her face, where her eyes looked forward yet tired, where her slender shoulders stood straight. "Is that the senator's daughter?" Heard she got pushed straight into flight training, never actually taken off. Paper pilot. Let's see how long she lasts. Emily heard every word. She had heard things like that her entire life. But today, in this place, every word cut deeper into a wound that hadn't yet healed. A wound that still ached in her bones during sleepless nights. She stopped in front of the mirror in the unit's bathroom. The sickly yellow light shone on her bare face, blue-grey eyes shadowed with faint dark circles, and a small scar along her hairline where hair never grew back. She exhaled, a long breath fogging up the mirror. She whispered to herself, "Emily, this is not the place to break. Not today." The Storm Ridge mess hall clanged with the sound of spoons hitting trays, the hurried stomp of boots, laughter bursting out when a recruit spilled coffee across a table. Emily sat in a corner, holding a tray of cold food. She ate slowly, bite by bite, not rushing, her eyes looking out the window where dawn began to paint the desert pink. At the next table, Carter, a young recruit with blonde hair and a confident grin, spoke loudly. "Heard that girl's never actually flown. Just simulators on paper. Paper pilot, paper pilot." A few of the young recruits snickered, glancing over at Emily, waiting for a reaction. She didn't look up, only tightened her grip on the spoon, her knuckles turning white, but her face remained calm. Outside the glass, the desert wind swept across the American flag on top of the barracks, making it flutter quietly. As she stood up to leave, Emily met Carter's eyes. He smirked. "Hope you don't embarrass this unit when you get in the cockpit." Emily paused, turned to him, her eyes no longer harmless, but flashing with a cold sharpness, deep and quietly sad. She replied, her voice low, without a single tremor, "I won't embarrass anyone. But you might want to be ready." She walked past them, leaving behind a brief silence, where a few recruits glanced at each other, confused by the demeanor of the paper pilot girl. Carter's brow furrowed, a crack forming in his arrogant gaze. That morning, Emily arrived at the simulator hangar an hour early, standing alone under the desert sky. She looked up at the thin white clouds, the sunlight beginning to grow harsh, and in that moment, memories rushed back. A black night, the frantic whir of rotor blades, the acrid smell of burning metal, bloodied hands gripping the controls, a choked radio voice, "Spectre, pull out now," and a teammate who never came back, leaving her with a promise no one else knew. Emily lowered her gaze, pulling a chipped pilot's badge from her pocket, her fingers brushing the cold metal edges as if touching an old wound. I'm still flying, even in the dark, still keeping the promise. The assembly whistle blew, pulling her back to the present. Emily tucked the badge into her pocket, took a deep breath, stood tall, and walked toward the simulator room, where eyes would be waiting, where whispers would rise again, where she would begin another day to prove a truth no one at Stormridge was ready to face. The simulator room at Stormridge smelled of scorched plastic and metal, the scent of cockpits run non-stop. Blue lights cast cold reflections on the concrete floor, bouncing off the old simulator chairs where young faces sat, tense with a mix of excitement and fear. Emily stood at the edge of the room, quietly observing. Her hand gently traced the seams of an old flight glove, fingers following every frayed edge, every loose stitch, as if they were part of her skin. She breathed in the scent of plastic and engine oil, her eyes darkening for a moment before blinking softly, reclaiming calm. Carter stood in front of simulator pod number 4, turning back with a confident grin, but a glint of rivalry in his eyes. "Watch closely, paper girl. I'll show you how a real pilot runs a sim." He stepped inside, powered it up, laughter echoing as the screens flickered on, the simulator engines rumbling. Emily walked calmly toward pod number 7, the farthest one near the window, where the natural light cut across her face, highlighting the shadows under her eyes and the cold clarity in her gaze. "Cadet Ward, here's your checklist." The instructor tossed a stack of papers at her with a flat look. "Try not to break this expensive simulator." Emily nodded slightly, taking the papers, her eyes scanning each line rapidly. For a moment, a memory returned. Numbers, coordinates, radio frequencies, the damp wind smelling of gunpowder, the commander's voice in her headset. "Spectre, heading 243. Drop altitude. Get your teammate out, any way you can." She closed her eyes, then opened them, folded the checklist, and slipped it into her pocket. Her hand rested on the control stick, her thin fingers trembling for a second, then tightening. Steady. The cold metal under her skin brought back every breath, every heartbeat pounding in her ears. Spectre. This isn't a simulation anymore. The simulator pod lit up. The simulated engines growled softly, the frame shaking. Emily booted up the systems, each step quick, precise, unshowy. The screens flashed data. She adjusted the controls, her eyes sweeping the panels as if she knew every scratch, every vibration. In her headset, Carter's voice rang out. "Watch closely. Emily, don't get scared." She didn't respond, only tightened her grip on the stick. One deep breath, her heartbeat slowing, the surrounding noise compressing into silence. She heard the desert sand brushing against the window, the steady beat of her heart, the distant laughter of someone who was gone. Never let them see you afraid. The training session began. On the screen, the runway appeared under harsh sunlight. Carter laughed over the radio, taking off recklessly, the simulated wheels kicking up clouds of virtual dust, the machine rattling as he pulled up too sharply, unstable. A few recruits cheered, egging him on. Emily pushed the throttle, the simulator wheels rolling, speed building smoothly. Her eyes tracked speed, lift, descent angle, wing tilt. As the craft lifted off the ground, the simulator frame shuddered softly, then stabilized, so smooth that no one heard the wheels squeal leaving the strip. In her headset, Carter's voice snapped, "Don't bail early, princess." Emily pressed the transmit button, her voice calm, even, but sharp. Forming up. Carter glanced to the side, his eyes widening. On the simulator screen, Emily's craft appeared right beside his, in the blind spot position no rookie dared to attempt. Emily slid in, the angle perfect, the distance so close that in real life it would have been only a few meters apart. She closed her eyes for a second, feeling the simulator's gentle vibration, her heart beating steady. In that moment, Storm Ridge disappeared. The sunlight vanished, leaving only the sound of wind, engines, and the silence of facing death. Inside the simulator pod, Emily kept her speed steady, eyes fixed on the data, ears tuned to every sound. The hum of the simulated engine, the cooling fans, the faint squeal of the simulator wheels lowering altitude. On the radio, Carter's voice wouldn't stop. "Don't think you're rattling me, Paper Princess. I've been flying since before I could walk." Emily didn't answer. Her hand adjusted the stick, fingers tightening as the machine trembled lightly. Her eyes swept the control panels, catching small discrepancies, fine-tuning the lift, each engine rotation. Suddenly, Carter's pod shook violently. "Shit!" His voice cracked, breathing heavy. On the display, Carter's aircraft staggered, altitude dropping fast, wings unsteady. Emily glanced quickly, then tightened her grip, guiding her craft closer, keeping a safe distance. "Stay calm, Carter," she said, her voice low, clear, without a hint of fear. "Adjust for crosswind, ease the stick, don't yank." "Shut up! Don't tell me what to do!" Carter shouted, his voice trembling. On the screen, his craft shook violently, warning lights flashing red. Emily clenched her jaw, her eyes lighting up, no longer the eyes of a young cadet, but the calm focus of someone who had stood on the edge between life and death. "Carter, listen to me. This isn't the time to prove yourself. Hold steady. Breathe. Outside." The instructor and a few others rushed over, eyes fixed on the screens, worried. Some glanced at Emily, shocked to see her flying steadily, creating space for Carter to stabilize, guiding him like an experienced leader. "I'm losing it. Look at me, Carter." Emily's voice rang out, firm, echoing across the simulator room. "Just look at me." Carter turned his head, eyes glassy, sweat streaming down his face, hands shaking on the controls. On the screen, Emily's aircraft held steady beside his, altitude just right to avoid turbulence. Emily gave a small, very small smile, just enough for Carter to see in that chaotic moment. "I'm here." In that moment, Carter took a deep breath, his hands shaking less, his eyes focusing on the readings as he slowly regained speed and stabilized his angle. The warning alarms on the screen softened, leaving only the steady hum of the simulated engine. "Thank you," Carter whispered, his voice almost breaking. Emily didn't say anything else, maintaining her speed, guiding her aircraft back into position, ready for landing. When the simulated landing signal echoed, she executed her maneuver so smoothly that the screen simply displayed "excellent, smooth landing." As for Carter, when he landed, his simulator jolted once more before flashing "acceptable, minor errors." The simulator room buzzed with whispers. Some of the cadets glanced at each other, some nodding, some in quiet shock. They had just witnessed something no classroom lecture could teach: a terrifying calm, an almost instinctive mastery of the controls, and a rare patience. The instructor stepped forward, looking at Emily, then at the screen, his eyes narrowing slightly in suspicion. "Ward, outside. Wait in the hall." Emily removed her headset, took off her gloves, and stepped out of the simulator pod. Her hands trembled slightly, but she clenched them, hiding them in her pockets. Outside, the desert wind blew fiercely, carrying the scent of sand and sun. She leaned against the wall, tilting her head back and closing her eyes, taking a long, deep breath. In that moment, a laugh echoed in her memory, the voice of a fallen comrade spectre. "You always kept calm even when everything was falling apart. Don't lose that." A single bead of sweat rolled down her temple, mixing with the sting in her eyes. But Emily did not cry. She opened her eyes, seeing the Nevada sky, endless and blue, through the hallway window. "I'm still alive, still flying." The simulator room door clicked shut behind Emily with a soft sound, but in her ears it rang like a bell, reminding her that the fragile peace at Stormridge was about to end. Emily returned to her room, her old backpack placed neatly at the foot of her bed. The noon sunlight streamed through the narrow window, sweeping across her face, highlighting the dark circles beneath her eyes and the faint scar at her temple. She sat on the edge of the bed, unlaced her boots, and exhaled softly, her shoulders relaxing after hours of holding them straight. From under her pillow, Emily pulled out a black fabric-bound notebook, its edges frayed, the folds worn deep. Her fingers brushed lightly across the cover, like a ritual before facing unnamed memories. She opened the notebook, flipped to a blank page, pulled out a pen, and wrote a single, short line: "Spectre, operational." The handwriting was slanted, firm, but her hand trembled slightly as she placed the final period. She closed the notebook, closed her eyes, breathed deeply, listening to the wind outside the window, carrying the scent of hot sand and the sound of the desert wind, so much like the nights in a distant place where she once was known by another name. That afternoon, Emily was summoned to the office of Instructor Reed, a former fighter pilot with a stern face and a long scar running down his wrist, a reminder of an accident he had never spoken about. He sat behind his desk, drumming his fingers lightly on the yellow file folder in front of him. As Emily stepped in, his eyes met hers, half scrutinizing, half curious, But one thing Emily saw clearly, he knew something. "Ward, sit down." Emily sat, back straight, eyes steady, but her hands rested on her lap, her fingers gently rubbing against each other. "I reviewed the simulator recording today," Reed began, his voice low, even, carrying neither reproach nor praise. "You saved Carter from a serious crash." Emily didn't respond, only nodded slightly. "But what interests me more," he leaned forward, his eyes sharpening, "is how you fly, your maneuvers, reflexes, judgment under pressure. They're not like someone who's only logged a few simulator hours." Emily looked at him, a shadow passing briefly through her eyes before it disappeared, replaced by calm. "I've practiced a lot." Reed chuckled softly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He opened the file, flipping through the pages before stopping. "Ward, your file is clean in a way that's unusual. Too clean. A few civilian flight courses, a handful of simulator hours before arriving here. No social media accounts, no old photos, no friends in contact. Do you know the kind of people I've trained before?" He slid a paper toward her, a photo of a group of young pilots standing together, smiling brightly. One of them, a young man whose eyes looked like Emily's, but it was a real smile. "People like you. I've seen them before," Reed said, his voice softening, dropping lower, tinged with sadness. "People who came back from places no one else knows about, carrying the eyes of those who have seen hell." Emily looked at the photo, her eyes softening for a moment before closing. "I just want to fly," she said quietly. "That's all." Reed watched her for a long moment before nodding, like someone who understood that better than anyone. He closed the file, stood up. "Ward, you'll have your first real flight tomorrow morning. No more simulators. Real. I want to see how you handle it." Emily stood, gripping her backpack strap, nodding. "I'm ready." "Ward," Reed called out as she reached the door. "Whoever you are, whatever your past is, don't let it kill your present." Emily paused, turned her head, her eyes catching the last light of the day streaming through the window. "I'm still alive, sir." And she left the office, leaving Reed standing there, watching her go, his gaze distant, as if seeing himself years ago, wearing his uniform, flying through skies heavy with smoke and fire. The dawn over the Nevada desert came with thin clouds turning the sky pink, the early cold wind sweeping across the quiet runway at Storm Ridge. Emily stood next to the old T-6 Texan, her hand resting on the aircraft's body, feeling the icy metal, every scratch, the smell of oil, dust, and morning sun trapped in the seams. Her breath misted in the chill of the morning, her eyes closing for a second as her hand slipped into her pocket, clutching the chipped pilot's badge wrapped in black cloth. Tomorrow, Spectre will fly again. That sentence echoed in her mind like a distant drumbeat, reminding her of a part of herself she once was, buried in order to keep living. Instructor Reed appeared, clipboard in hand, his face etched in the rising sunlight. "Ward," he said, short and clear. "Today you fly." Emily nodded, her gaze steady, showing not a flicker of fear. "You will take off, run a 40-minute patrol around the desert, and land. This is the test every recruit faces. But with you, he paused, eyes piercing into hers. I want to know just who you really are. Emily didn't answer. Stepping toward the cockpit, she climbed up, the safety harness crossing over her shoulders, the click of the buckle loud as it locked, her hand resting on the control stick, her fingers trembling slightly before steadying. Her eyes scanned each gauge, each number, every light flickering on. Spectre, this is no longer a simulation. The radio crackled. Storm Ridge Tower to T6 Ward, runway 14, winds 5 knots, cleared for takeoff. Emily nudged the throttle, the machine vibrating, wheels rolling, speed building, the ground rumbling beneath the aircraft. The wind rushed into the cockpit, carrying the scent of metal and desert air. A familiar scent, like a memory pulling her backward. Spectre, pull up, pull up. Emily pulled back on the stick. Gently, the T6 lifting off the ground, the wheels leaving the runway, the frame trembling softly before steadying in the air, the morning light flooding through the cockpit windows, illuminating her face, revealing the deep blue-gray of her eyes. On the ground, Carter stood with arms crossed, his eyes following the shrinking T6 against the blue sky. In his eyes was no longer just arrogance, but confusion and doubt. Last night, Carter hadn't slept, secretly digging through Emily's files, each paper, each record, everything too clean, too perfect, like a file crafted on purpose. "Who are you, Emily Ward?" Carter whispered, his hand tightening, his eyes never leaving the path of the circling aircraft. In the cockpit, Emily leaned, adjusting the wings, the descent angle, checking the airspeed, altitude, the readings cutting into her memory like a familiar song. Every movement was smooth, without hesitation. She flew close to the mountain range, feeling the sudden shift in wind, the aircraft trembling lightly. But she adjusted with a simple twist of her wrist. Over the radio, Reed's voice called out, "Ward, you're flying a little low. Adjust altitude up 200 feet. Copy." Emily's voice was low, crisp, not a word wasted, not a tremor, not a ragged breath. But in that moment, an image flashed before her eyes, a distant mountain range, a black night, flares, the screeching howl of rockets tearing the air, the choked crackle of the radio spectre, drop-altitude missiles inbound. Her hand tightened slightly on the control stick, sweat beading on her forehead. But she did not panic. Her eyes lit up, cold, absolutely focused. The T6 banked sharply, cutting through a sudden gust, the aircraft shuddering slightly before steadying once more. On the ground, Reed watched the radar screen, his eyes narrowing as he saw the T6 executing smooth, precise maneuvers no recruit could ever pull off on a first flight. "Ward," he whispered, "who are you? Really?" When Emily landed, the wheels touched the runway so lightly there was almost no screech, the aircraft steady, rolling smoothly along the strip. She pulled the brakes, eased the throttle, stopping precisely on the designated line. She unbuckled, removed her headset, exhaled deeply, tilting her head back, eyes closed, sunlight streaming across her sweat-soaked face. her lips curling into a small smile. I can still fly. That afternoon at Storm Ridge, the sun was harsh, the desert winds sweeping fine dust across the runways and the row of hangars, slipping through cracks in the doors, leaving the thick scent of sand and engine oil hanging in the air. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, back against the wall, eyes looking out the narrow window at the cloudless, endless blue sky. Her fingers traced the edge of the old black fabric-bound notebook, stopping at the frayed corner, her gaze turning quiet. A knock sounded at the door. She set the notebook down and stood. The door opened, and Carter stood there, breathing hard, his hand gripping the phone in his pocket, unable to hide the anxiety in his eyes. "I need to talk," he panted, his voice hoarse. "Now's not the time," Emily replied, her eyes glancing down the empty hallway. "No, it has to be now." The look in Carter's eyes at that moment was firm, something in it making Emily take half a step back before nodding, allowing him to enter. Inside, Carter paced, hands clenched, eyes red. "I went through your file, Emily. I know something's off." Emily stayed silent, her gaze dropping to her hands, thin but strong, clenching so hard her knuckles turned white. "Your record is too clean. No old photos, no past, just a few lines of fabricated data. I asked a contact in the Air Force. They found no record of any special program that brought you here." Carter stepped closer, placing his phone in front of her. On the screen was an old photo, a group of pilot soldiers standing in front of a helicopter, bright smiles, and in the far left corner, a young woman with tied-back hair, blue-grey eyes, a gentle smile but an intense gaze. She looked frighteningly like Emily. "Who is this? And why does she have your face?" Emily looked at the photo, her eyes flickering, her breath catching for half a second, her finger lightly touching the screen. In that moment, the room felt utterly silent, only the whistle of the wind slipping through the cracks. "I'm asking you again. Emily, who are you?" Emily closed her eyes, took a deep breath, then opened them, looking straight at Carter, her voice low, cold as steel. "I'm someone who shouldn't exist." A sudden knock pounded at the door. Before Carter could speak again, the door opened, and Instructor Reed stepped in, followed by a man in a grey suit with a black tie, his eyes cold, expressionless, a leather briefcase in hand. The air in the room grew heavy. "Ward, you're coming with us," Reed said, his voice low but firm. "What's going on?" Carter snapped, his voice rising. "Out, cadet." Reed turned to Carter, his gaze hard. "Now?" "No, I have the right to know." Carter shouted, his hands shaking. The man in the suit stepped closer, his eyes sharp as a blade. "Cadet Carter, the only advice I have for you is this: if you want to graduate and continue living a peaceful life, you will forget everything you saw today." Emily placed a hand on Carter's shoulder, her touch warm, steady, her eyes locking with his, her voice low enough for him alone. "Thank you for caring, Carter, but from now on, forget me." She pulled her hand away, stepping forward to follow the suited man and Reed, without looking back. Carter stood there, fists clenched, eyes red, breathing hard, powerless as the door shut with a cold click, cutting them off. Inside Reed's office, the windows were covered with blinds, yellow lamplight casting across the files spread on the desk. The suited man opened his briefcase, pulling out a thick envelope, flipping through the papers. Emily stood tall, eyes forward, breathing steady. No trace of fear. "Emily Ward," the man read aloud, his voice even. Or rather, Captain Emily Spectre Hayes, pilot formerly engaged in Black Ops missions in the Middle East. Reed's brow furrowed, his eyes on Emily, part surprise, part recognition of the suspicion he had long held. "You died in a plane crash 3 years ago," the man continued, eyes fixed on Emily. "That was the official report." Emily exhaled softly, her voice low, dry. "I know." "Then why are you here, at Stormridge, under a new identity, among recruits who know nothing about the real Sky?" Emily stared into the man's eyes, her gaze turning into a cold abyss. "Because this country still needs me." Reed watched, his gaze complex. He had once been a pilot, had seen that look in faces that never returned. He knew that those who carried that gaze had sacrificed more than anyone could imagine. For a brief moment, Emily's shoulders dropped, but her eyes glinted again. "If necessary, I will fly again." The man in the suit nodded slightly, closing the file, his eyes softening just a fraction. "We know, and we will soon need you." That night, Stormridge was quieter than usual. The desert wind swept across the rows of hangars, rattling the tin roofs softly, the scent of warm sand blending into the cold Nevada night. Emily sat in her room, the yellow lamp casting shadows on her face, making her eyes look deeper, darker in the dimness. Before her on the desk lay the pilot's badge wrapped in black cloth, silent, like a low note in a long song. She placed her hand on the badge, closing her eyes, and in a moment, Stormridge vanished, replaced by the smell of gunpowder, the whine of engines in the night, and the shattered scream over the radio Spectre move missiles inbound. She opened her eyes, exhaling slowly, her shoulders trembling for a moment before regaining her familiar calm. The door opened, and Instructor Reed stepped in, his face serious, holding a new file. His eyes on Emily this time carried no suspicion, only respect mixed with worry. "Ward, or should I call you Hayes, or Spectre?" he asked, his voice low. Emily lifted her gaze, meeting his, her eyes calm but unyielding. "I'm still Emily, sir." Reed nodded slightly, setting the file on the table. He sat down across from her, exhaling softly, his fingers interlaced, his gaze locked on hers. "Tomorrow, they're having you test fly a Recon Ghost X, the next-gen stealth recon aircraft. You're the only one here capable enough to fly it. And they didn't say it, but I know this isn't just a test flight." Emily stayed silent, her hand gripping the table's edge. In her eyes, determination flared, but the old exhaustion crept back in. "This will be a real mission, won't it?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Reed nodded, his eyes aging a few years in that moment. "Yes. If the flight succeeds, they'll send you into a high-risk zone for intel gathering. If it fails—" He stopped, not needing to finish. Emily took a deep breath, exhaled, her eyes on the badge on the table. The yellow light glinted off the chipped metal. A quiet reminder. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "I've always been ready." That night, Emily did not sleep. She stepped out into the campyard, the night wind tossing her tied-back hair, carrying the scent of desert sand and cold air. Above, the sky was filled with stars, each one blinking like quiet eyes watching. She lifted her head, staring at the stars, remembering those nights when she used to fly, remembering the moment her aircraft burned in the air, when she had to pull her teammate out, leaving the wreck to crash into the Middle Eastern mountains, leaving behind a report, "All hands lost." Emily clenched her hands, her breath quickening. Then she placed a hand on her chest, feeling her heartbeat, slowly reclaiming her calm. "I'm still alive," she whispered. "I'm still here." The next morning, as the sunlight touched the mountain ridges, Emily stood beside the Recon Ghost X, the aircraft's sharp-angled design, coated in matte black light-absorbing paint, bore no logos, no serial numbers. The wind brushed against its cold frame, giving the feeling of touching a living creature, breathing slowly, waiting to be awakened. The man in the grey suit from the day before stood next to Reed, watching Emily with cold, assessing eyes. He gave a single nod, holding a tablet, saying nothing. Reed stepped forward, handing Emily her flight helmet, his eyes locking with hers. "This isn't a test. This is your chance to prove you're still Spectre." Emily put on the helmet, zipped up her flight suit, a determined glint lighting up her eyes. "I never forgot who I am." She climbed into the cockpit, closing the canopy, the click sealing her off from the outside world. The radio crackled in her helmet, Reed's voice coming through softly. "Ghost X. This is Stormridge, runway 21, light winds, cleared for takeoff." Emily placed her hand on the control stick, her eyes scanning every gauge, every signal, her breathing steady, her chest rising gently beneath the flight suit. She closed her eyes for a single moment, feeling the silence before the engines roared to life. Spectre, ready. She pushed the throttle forward, the machine shuddering lightly before surging ahead, wheels lifting off the ground in a seamless moment as the Ghost X rose into the sky, slicing through the air, reaching for the endless blue above. On the ground, Carter stood by the runway, his eyes following the dark silhouette against the sky, confusion mixed with fear and awe in his gaze. "Who are you really, Emily?" he whispered, watching as the Ghost X disappeared into the sky like a shadow that never existed. The Nevada sky at 8 a.m. was so blue it almost hurt to look at. The Recon Ghost X cut through the thin air, leaving only a faint ripple, nearly traceless. Inside the cockpit, Emily sat straight, her hand on the control stick, her eyes scanning the dashboard. Each breath short, precise, sure. Ghost X. This is Stormridge. Report your status. Emily pressed the transmit button, her voice even, speed 290 knots. Altitude 25,000 feet. Systems stable. Signal clear. Below. Instructor Reed stood beside the man in the grey suit, eyes following the flight path on the radar screen. The Ghost X's signal dot moving smoothly, steadily, precisely. "She's no recruit," Reed murmured. The man in the suit didn't respond, only giving a slight nod, his eyes never leaving the screen. In the cockpit, Emily exhaled, her eyes catching the mountain ranges in the distance as memories rushed back for a fleeting second. A black night, a helicopter rattling under anti-aircraft fire, her teammates screaming in her headset. "Spectre, pull out now, they've spotted us." The wind screaming past the frame, the engines roar, pulling her back to the present. Emily blinked, tightened her grip on the control stick, her eyes sharpening with cold focus. "No, this time, I'm coming back. Initiate emergency scenario simulation." The man in the suit commanded over the radio. Instantly, red lights flashed in the cockpit. Alarm sirens wailed, the dashboard displaying engine failure. Left engine. The Ghost X shook violently, tilting, speed dropping fast. Emily gripped the stick, adjusting for balance, her eyes scanning the readings, her right hand flipping emergency switches, her voice low, calm. Left engine failure, stabilizing. Activating single-engine flight system. The Ghost X tilted, losing 500 feet of altitude, shuddering violently, the wind screaming past her ears like the wails of the damned. Spectre, regain control. Emily inhaled deeply, her hand tightening on the control stick, adjusting the wing angles, reducing throttle on the right, her eyes locked on the warning radar, beads of sweat rolling down her temple. Below, Reed held his breath as the Ghost X's signal wavered on the radar. Carter, standing farther back, ran closer, eyes wide as he saw the red alert on the screen. "What's happening to her?" Reed pushed him aside, his eyes fixed on the screen, jaw clenched. "She's being tested. In the air." Emily felt every vibration, every tremor of the frame, the alarms ringing endlessly, but she wasn't afraid. Her hands moved with precision, her eyes looking through the canopy, her lips murmuring softly. "Wind speed, altitude, lift, hold it, Emily." The Ghost X banked one final time before steadying, the remaining engine roaring with strain, but holding the flight path. In that moment, sunlight streamed through the canopy, illuminating Emily's sweat-soaked face, her eyes shining with determination. "I'm still alive." The control room let out a quiet cheer as the signal stabilized again. Reed exhaled, while Carter stood frozen, gripping the metal rail, eyes fixed on the blinking signal, moving steadily once more. "Who is she? Really?" Carter whispered. "In the cockpit." The man's voice came through the radio. "Ghost X. Systems stabilized. Simulation complete. Prepare for landing." Emily nodded, wiping the sweat from her forehead, her eyes flicking across the dashboard, her voice steady over the radio copy, descending for landing. The Ghost X slowly descended, breaking through thin clouds, shuddering slightly as the desert winds struck the frame, but holding steady. When the wheels touched the runway, the sound was soft, the frame shuddering once before rolling smoothly, decelerating, stopping precisely at the designated mark. Emily sat still, eyes closing for a moment before opening, the corner of her lips lifting slightly. Mission complete. She removed her helmet, stepping down from the cockpit, the desert sun shining on her tired yet calm face. Her hair, damp with sweat, clung to her skin as her eyes looked directly toward Reed and the man in the suit walking toward her. Reed stopped in front of her, silent for a long moment, before giving a small nod. His eyes filled with respect. Well done. Spectre. Carter, some things aren't about owing. They're about responsibility. People like me, we don't get to live normal lives. Carter clenched his fists, tears welling in his eyes. But you deserve to live. Emily. The corner of Emily's mouth lifted, a sad smile appearing, her eyes misting slightly, but her voice firm. I am living, Carter, just in my own way. She placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. Forget me. That night, Emily left her room, wearing her flight suit, backpack on her shoulders, walking toward the hangar where the Recon Ghost X waited. The night wind blew her hair loose, carrying the cold scent of sand. She stopped in front of the hangar door, looking up at the star-filled sky. The stars sparkled like thousands of quiet eyes watching, witnessing the silence of someone about to step into the darkness. I'm not afraid, she whispered, because I've already come back from the dead. Inside the hangar, Instructor Reed stood waiting. Beside him, the man in the grey suit. They nodded at Emily, saying nothing. Reed handed her a sealed envelope, marked with a single line, Mission Echo, eyes only. Emily took it, opened it, reading quickly. Her eyes sharpened, each word engraving itself into her mind. Convoy transporting chemical weapons. Objective confirm. Capture images. Extract without detection. The man in the suit spoke, his voice low, emotionless. If you're captured, no one will come for you. This mission does not exist. Emily folded the file, tucking it into her flight suit pocket, her eyes locking onto his. I understand. Reed stepped forward, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder, his voice softening. No matter what happens, you're still the best pilot I've ever known. Emily smiled softly, her eyes gentle, her voice calm. Thank you, Reed. As Emily climbed into the cockpit of the Ghost X, the aircraft shivered slightly under her weight. Her hand brushed across the control panels, feeling the cold metal, the wires, the switches, the buttons, each one waiting for her breath to bring them to life. She pulled the harness across her chest, locked it in place, her fingers tightening around the control stick. In that moment, every sound outside went silent, leaving only the sound of her slow, steady breathing in the cockpit. Spectre. ready, capturing images. Confirmed at least 12 vehicles, including a large truck showing signs of carrying chemical containers. Emily's voice was steady, her breathing slow. She banked the aircraft, dropping another 200 feet to get a clearer shot with the camera. In that moment, moonlight hit the wing of the Ghost X, reflecting onto the desert sand, leaving a brief glint. Suddenly, the radar signal flashed red. Reed's urgent voice came through Spectre, 2 high-heat signatures approaching from the east. "Get out now!" Before Emily could react, a streak of blue light flashed across her screen, followed by the sharp wail of an alarm warning missile lock detected. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She yanked the control stick, the Ghost X banking sharply, diving low, the wind shrieking past the fuselage like knives. The missile exploded behind her, a flash of light, the pressure wave rocking the Ghost X violently. The dashboard flashing red engine failure, right engine, no, not now, Emily whispered, gripping the stick, sweat beading on her forehead, her eyes wide, utterly focused. She activated the emergency power systems, shutting down the right engine to prevent fire, diverting all power to the left engine, which sputtered weakly. The Ghost X rocked, altitude dropping rapidly, warning alarms screaming in her ears. "Spectre, report status," Reed's voice shouted through the radio. "Right engine lost, left engine unstable, still under control." Emily's voice was hoarse but unwavering. She clenched her teeth, arms straining to keep the stick steady as the plane shook through a gust of wind, lights blinking on the dashboard. But her eyes never left the screen, the image of the convoy still being recorded in the aircraft's drive. "I have to bring this back, have to bring the truth back." On the radar, the Ghost X turned into a faint, flickering dot, its speed dropping, 3 other signals closing in. Reed stared at the screen, his hand clenching, his lips pressed tight. Climb, Spectre, climb. Inside the cockpit, Emily took a deep breath, her left hand adjusting the fuel pressure, her right hand gripping the stick, her eyes looking into the black sky ahead. She let go of him, pulling from her pocket the chipped pilot's badge wrapped in black cloth, placing it in Carter's hand, her eyes firm. "Keep this, to remember that there are people willing to step into the darkness so others can live in the light." The sound of military vehicles approaching echoed, the man in the grey suit turning back to call Spectre. "It's time to move." Emily looked at Carter one last time, their eyes exchanging an unspoken promise. Then she turned, stepping onto the waiting vehicle, never looking back. In the vehicle, Emily sat by the window, sunlight casting over her face, revealing the small scar at her temple, the eyes of someone who had seen too much death, yet had not lost their resolve. She looked outside, watching Storm Ridge fade into the distance, the desert sand swirling like mist, the mountains in the distance blurring in the morning light. In that moment, Emily placed a hand over her heart, feeling it still beating, and whispered, "I'm still Emily, but when needed, I will be Spectre again." In the Storm Ridge command room, Reed stood silently in front of the now dark radar screen. He sighed, his eyes looking out the window at the sky where a new day was beginning. Fly safe, Spectre, outside. Carter still stood there, gripping the pilot's badge tightly, watching the vehicle carrying Emily disappear. A faint smile breaking through his tears. Thank you for existing, Emily. That night, in a small motel room near the border, Emily sat at an old wooden table, the yellow lamp illuminating the drops of water still clinging to her hair after her shower. The night breeze drifted through the window, bringing with it the scent of sand and the quiet sounds of the dark. In front of her lay the black fabric-bound notebook, its edges frayed, open to its last blank page. She held her pen, her fingers trembling for a moment before stilling, taking a deep breath, her eyes going quiet for an instant. She began to write date, month, year. I have returned, but not to live for myself. I have returned, carrying the truth, carrying the promise to protect what matters. Even if no one knows, no one remembers, I will keep flying. I will keep fighting, because there are those born to walk into the darkness so that others may see the light. She set the pen down, closing her eyes, taking a long breath, listening as her heartbeat steadied, then closed the notebook, tying it once more with the black cloth, placing it deep inside the locked drawer. Emily stood, stepping out onto the balcony, the night wind tossing her hair, carrying the scent of sand and cold air. Above her, the sky was filled with stars, reflected in her blue-grey eyes. She looked up at the sky, the corner of her lips lifting into a rare, peaceful smile. I'm still alive. And when needed, I will be Spectre again, somewhere else. Carter stood on the grounds of the old training airfield, the chipped pilot's badge in his hand. He clenched it tightly, looking up at the sky where the stars shone, his eyes glistening, yet firm. Thank you, Emily. Because of you, I understand what true courage means. The story closes, but Spectre still flies somewhere in the night sky, silent, nameless, unyielding, so that wherever darkness lurks, where danger waits to steal away peace, people like Emily will quietly step in, asking for no glory, no gratitude, only to do what must be done, because there are those born to protect the world, even if the world never knows their name.